My name is Sarah Robertson and I'm going to be hosting tonight's chat. I'm the Marketing, Communications and Events Manager here at the Melbourne Entrepreneurial Centre. And on behalf of the team, including the teams from MAP and TRAM, thanks very much for coming along tonight. So the way the Fireside Chat is going to work is we're going to have an interview for about half an hour or so, and then we're going to open up to the floor for questions, taking us through until about 6:30 p.m. But before we kick off, I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the country where I'm dialing in from today, Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung and Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. I pay respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders here tonight. And given that we're all dialing in from all different places, I urge you to pay respects to the traditional owners of the lands you're on tonight. So our Fireside Chat series is designed to help founders learn from people who have been there and done that. Each chat, you'll hear the journey of a prominent entrepreneur in the startup ecosystem, how they did it and what worked for them. And we hope you'll be able to take away some actionable advice and strategies that might assist you in your own entrepreneurial journey. With that in mind, I would love to welcome our guest speaker for this evening, Alex Jannink. Alex is a passionate advocate for road safety, focusing on interventions that improve road user behaviour. He's the managing director and founder of Acusensus, an innovative road safety technology provider, which delivered the world first distracted driving enforcement camera solution deployed by the government of New South Wales in Australia, Acusensus Heads-Up. Acusensus was also part of the MAP cohort in 2018. Prior to founding Acusensus, Alex was the head of research and development for a leading multinational traffic solutions provider and has developed camera enforcement technology that has been deployed in over 30 countries. Thank you so much for joining us, Alex.
Thanks a lot, Sarah. Great to be able to speak with you today, and thanks everybody for attending.
Yeah, wonderful. So enough of me talking. Let's pass it over to you for a little bit of an introduction.
Sure. So I thought I'd start with a bit about Acusensus and myself, then maybe move on to how Acusensus was formed, the journey, including challenges and scaling. And then at the end, before we get in the Q&A, I'd like to end with the 5 things that I think enabled me to build a global company from scratch, operating across 5 continents in less than 4 years. What do you reckon? Should I keep going, Sarah?
Yeah, get stuck in.
Okay, great. So turning to Acusensus, our mission is to use technology to solve societal issues, focused initially in the road safety space. And my personal goal for the company is to provide $10 billion of societal benefit. We're known for developing the enforcement camera solution that deters drivers from using their mobile phones while behind the wheel. This behaviour is exceptionally dangerous, causing up to 1/4 of road trauma. Our program went live in New South Wales at the end of 2019 and has been very effective at changing behaviour. So when we first piloted the cameras, 1 in 80 drivers in New South Wales was found using a phone. Our cameras now detect 1 in 500 drivers using a phone illegally across statewide operations, so a 5-fold reduction in harmful behaviour. And so far, 71 less people have died on New South Wales roads since this program began, compared with the 2018-2019 trend. So we were founded in 2018 with no contracts, no IP, just an idea and seed investment. And now we have annual revenue of tens of millions of dollars. Hello. Okay, so I'm 36 now. I've had about 10 years of industry experience before founding Acusensus. So I started my career in 2006 as a software engineer at that multinational traffic camera company headquartered in Melbourne. I had some pretty continuous career progression. In 2009, I developed the first iteration of those ticketless car parking cameras that check your license plates. You go in and out of shopping centres. They're common now, but they weren't back then. I became an R&D, or research and development team leader 3 years into my career there, very young by that company's standards. And I was responsible for radar vehicle detection solutions that were deployed in about 30 countries. After a few years, I decided to take night classes, completing an MBA at RMIT alongside a great cohort of experienced professionals. In 2015, I landed the role of head of future product group, basically head of R&D at my company, and I had about 20 or so engineers in my group in that role. In late 2013, my friend and colleague James Rapley was run over and killed by an impaired and allegedly distracted driver. I was quite devastated by that loss. And so for a time, I was preoccupied with devising possible solutions that could have prevented his death. And by late 2015, I noticed the first uptick in developed world road fatalities. And I was pretty convinced that the smartphone, introduced only a couple of years prior, was the leading cause. So I approached my company's management in 2016 and said, hey, I want to find a solution to distracted driving. Can I have $1 million, please? And they said, no, there's no market for what you want to do. And they were technically right. Nobody in the road safety community was talking about mobile phone use. It wasn't until about 2018, 2019 that there started to be broad acceptance that mobile phones were killing people on the roads. I was pretty depressed about my idea being rejected. You know, it was pretty close to my heart. So I discussed that with many acquaintances and trusted advisors, and a few of them said, Alex, you should start a business and do it yourself. I had tried and failed a couple of times before at business ventures. One was a traffic detection business, but we were too comfortable in our jobs, didn't take it seriously. One was a coffee roasting business, and I knew absolutely nothing about coffee, so that wasn't a great idea. My partner was very kind to buy me out of that one. Going into this venture, from that experience, I knew I had to do the job properly, you know, no turning back, go all in. And to do that, you know, I needed to give this 100% commitment for at least 2 years, which meant finding capital and a backer before starting. So I spent 2017 going through my network one by one, telling people what my idea was and asking them if they knew anybody who would back it. And I was very fortunate to have a really great contact in Austrade who said, Alex, I know exactly who you need to meet. And he called Ravan Mirchandani, based in India, and said, hey, come to this traffic conference in Perth and meet this guy, Alex. So Ravan flew out from India and we hit it off pretty much right away. It took us a long time to finalize a shareholders agreement, but the initial investment was done on a whiteboard in about 30 seconds. And Ravan invested $600,000 at a 1.2 million valuation. And so I resigned my existing job at the end of 2017, and Acusensus was founded 26th of March 2018. And we started actually with 3 different solution ideas for Acusensus, and I explored each one of them simultaneously until it became really clear that the phone distraction one could actually find a market. And timing and luck are important. You know, you have to have the right idea, but at the right time. And we were very fortunate that the New South Wales government had a proactive minister, and she was ready and willing to combat phone distraction. So we worked with the government through 2018, went through a head-to-head evaluation process, won that, kept innovating, won a pilot contract, and were then awarded the full rollout contract. So we supplied the world's first program for mobile phone enforcement here in New South Wales. We also supplied the world's first program for seatbelt enforcement deployed in Queensland this year. You know, a quarter of occupant fatalities are unbuckled, so a seatbelt really does save your life. I had a growth mindset and a global strategy for the company right from the start. So for example, we appointed our international sales head, Sean, and US sales executive, Mark, before the first birthday of the company. So fast forward, we now have pilot systems in 5 continents and about 50 permanent employees. We haven't cracked South America or Antarctica yet. We've seen some amazing growth in our team, our products, our clients, but also our revenue. So thanks to the University of Melbourne accepting us into the accelerator program, we made $20,000 in our first financial year through the MAP grant. But getting into the MAP program was a massive confidence booster for me. It was the point where I actually believed I had a chance of the business having any success, you know, because you have a panel of experienced people who thought that this was a company that could succeed over all those other applicants. And I grew a lot through that program, through the coaching of the mentors and the MAP team, and through the cohort of the other startups. In our second year, we made $1 million as we piloted our solution in New South Wales, alongside some other smaller revenue sources. Then we doubled that the next year to 2 million. Then we tripled that to 6 million the next year. And now we look set this year to quintuple that revenue. So that growth has required a lot of subsequent capital raises. And I've always been a proponent that you should get enough capital in to get the job done and not worry about dilution. So focus on having a smaller piece of a bigger pie. So our cap raise history was that seed investment that Raven did in early 2018, then a Series A in mid-2019, $3 million at a $10 million valuation, then a pre-IPO in mid-2020, $2 million at a $27 million valuation. Then we went through the whole IPO process in late 2020, where we were raising 10 million at a $33 million valuation. And an IPO process is a huge undertaking. We were massively oversubscribed, but we pulled out of that one very late in the process because we reconsidered our options with new information. We were landing some really big deals, had the complement of a competitor interference, and we had some other investment options available. So we decided to stay private and have completed a very successful subsequent capital raise this year. There've been a few challenges along the way. As good of a documentary as the US TV show Silicon Valley is, there is only so much you can learn from it. So for a first-time founder, there is a lot you don't know about legals, company formation, cap raising mechanics, and those things would be really obvious and easy for a second-time founder. And while I love asking for advice and seeking input, I've come to realize that very, very few people have actually walked in your path before in the entrepreneurial world. You know, lots of people give you advice very confidently, but I find that while you should listen to it and incorporate it, following it fully is often a mistake. You know, it's better to back yourself, I think, in this journey. I'm not sure how I could have managed workload and stress better, but the reality is that the early stage startup is going to be really high stress, regardless of what happens. You know, if you aren't successful, you're going to be stressed about money and failure. If you are successful, you'll be stressed about how to scale and grow. I mean, either way, you'll probably be working your guts out. So I have never worked harder in my life than I did in 2018, and it hasn't slowed down much since. I took about 10 days off throughout the whole of 2018, including weekends and public holidays. So 355 days of work, and they were not short days. So you have to work very hard, but you also have to work very smart. You know, I really like the Pareto principle. So get your 80% solution with 20% of the effort. And so as a founder, you have to do absolutely everything from legals to finances, sales to development, and you have to do it all so fast so you remain prioritized on what can actually get you to revenue. My past experiences meant that I had a lot to draw on to make this successful. So I think it's a lot easier to found a successful startup if you're in your 30s and your 20s, and probably easier if you're in your 40s and your 30s. And so these are those 5 key things that I had before I started this business that I think enabled success. First, I had a clear passion and a burning need to solve this problem. And I was all in on it. Second, I understood the customers very deeply and how to develop a solution very deeply. So I knew what drove the customer decisions, what was important to them in a provider and in a technology. And I understood the R&D process really well. Yeah, I'd learned on somebody else's dollar how you could burn a lot of time and also where you can make shortcuts. Third, I knew key aspects of running a business and leading a team. So for example, from my MBA, I knew all the accounting concepts. From my career, I'd seen what management approaches work and didn't work and had pretty strong views on those. So in particular, I strongly believe that culture shits all over strategy. So have a great team of people that you want to work with, no assholes, people who you trust to have your back, and measure them by their behavior and their attitude. Fourth, I had experience hiring great people. So I've done a lot of hiring in my career, and when you think about it, your people are the biggest factor in your startup success. You know, we've got an awesome team at Acusensus, and you know, we now have about 50 employees, and that's a lot of hiring activity to be done, and you have to get it right. So each and every person is critical. Like one misstep sets you back a long way in a small, fast-paced team. I think when I first started out in my career, my hiring track record was probably about 50-50, and whereas we're now pretty close to 100-0. So I think that's very important in being ultimately successful. And my final point is that I had a pretty decent Rolodex of people that I knew. So almost all of them were from my working career, some from my MBA, some from MAP. And knowing people helps you a lot. You can ask for advice. You can ask where would they go, you know, for example, for money, for capital raising, where would they find a recruiter? You know, most major events that Acusensus has gone through have been off the back of a personal recommendation or connection. So thanks for listening through that monologue. I'll hand the mic back to Sarah.
No, thank you. It's so good to get a nice chunky introduction so that when I'm asking questions, we're not having to go back and cover old territory again. So thanks so much for that, Alex. I guess my first, I've got a couple of questions to kick off with. We'll go with the first one. What about the road safety space captured your interest to begin with?
To be honest, I just fell into it initially. There was a part-time job. I got a job while I was still at university, part-time as a software engineer with that first company that I joined. And then I started to get more and more passionate about it over time. I think it's really nice to be able to work in a sector where you actually, have some clear difference that you could make, where you can reduce an injury, reduce a fatality. I think that's pretty powerful. And then obviously I had my own personal experience that really brought it home for me as well.
Yeah, and I know that I was watching some interviews that you've done previously on TV, and you'd mentioned in one of your interviews that basically everybody knows somebody that's either been injured or killed in a road accident. Does it kind of get you goat when you sort of see articles about Acusensus where they're talking about, that spy cameras or revenue raising, and they're all the privacy stuff that sort of, sits behind it? Does that sort of stuff really annoy you?
No, I wouldn't say it annoys me. I mean, it's part of human nature, really. You are right. It is such a leading cause of death, and particularly for younger people, the leading cause of death is road accidents globally. And so, it is somewhere where you can make a big difference. And people will always sort of rally against privacy or perceptions of revenue raising. And as long as sort of that you can get enough people on side that the government is confident enough to proceed with programs, then you can make that difference. I think when people go to, is this a revenue raising activity? The reality of the government is it really isn't, certainly not in Australia. It is definitely a road safety activity, and these enforcement programs have a big impact. And you look at RBT, so random breath testing, had a huge impact on injuries and fatalities. And we saw it in this mobile phone detection camera program. Correlation isn't causation, but there's been a big decline since our program started, and I don't particularly believe in coincidences.
Back on the privacy front, you're not the only MAP team to have had some challenges around, I guess, privacy laws and things like that. How have you navigated that challenge with all the different governments you've had to deal with?
I think we started with the mindset of saying what would get the public on side. And so we knew right from the start that privacy was going to be a big issue. And so we started with the mindset of, okay, we don't own this data, our customer owns it, and that we can't retain images, just as an absolute philosophy. And so we designed in right from the start, basically, that our solution couldn't, just by its design, couldn't retain and store a whole lot of drivers' images. And that's created a lot of complexity for us. So how do we train an AI system without actually retaining all the images? That was very difficult, but it gives the government confidence, and it can give the public confidence. I had this very interesting, I think there's one interview that I've done that never went to air. And so it was an ABC podcast. They interviewed me, and their whole line of questioning was around privacy. And they said something along the lines, well, if the police commissioner, were to call you and said, hey, we need the photos of this such and such time and this because we're doing this terrorist catching activity or whatever, would you hand over the photos? I said, I can't. The system does not retain those photos. It's just totally impossible. And they didn't really like my answers, so they didn't air the interview.
Oh, well, these things happen. So you spoke a lot about growth during your introduction, and Acusensus has had a lot of growth. I think since I read an article from 2019 that you had 11 employees and you've got around 50 employees now. Can you talk us through, I guess, how that has how that's been trying to build a cohesive team and build a workplace culture that you're proud of while still trying to, get all the work done that you actually need to get done.
Yeah, I think it was going pretty well for the first 3 years, where you were at that sort of 5, 10, 20 level, where it was still fairly easy to retain the key values and the core culture. And then the last particularly 6 months has been extremely challenging because our customer growth and revenue growth has really outstripped our capacity to onboard people and retain the really great culture. So it's a very big focus area for us right now. The early employee growth in the company was a lot of personal connections. So, who do you know? And the best thing is having somebody vouch for somebody else, where they go, yep, this person would be really great in your business. And that has never, ever gone wrong for me. So I was very fortunate to have that. But once you sort of reach 20 or 30 people in the team, that channel is fairly tapped out. And so now we have a really great recruitment partner, and she's been fantastic at helping us, go to market with campaigns. But it is an ongoing struggle for us actually to have enough people on the team. So our budget for this year calls for, I think, an additional 50% of roles that we're adding over the next few months, basically, to cope with our client base.
Yeah, well, there you go, everybody. Acusensus is hiring. Get your resumes ready.
Yeah, any great software engineers, or if you know any great software engineers, please have them email me, alex@acusensus.com. Thanks.
I know that from a HR point of view, you've also talked previously about offering employment opportunities to disadvantaged sectors of the community. And I think you were one of the Cameron Fellowship recipients when you were as part of your cohort. Can you take us through what that looks like?
Yeah, this is something that we're quite proud of, and we love it internally, but we don't publicize it. So we've got a couple of different partnerships. So, for example, we have a partnership with Spinal Cord Injuries Australia. And so a number of people who do image review for us are living with a spinal cord injury. So it's been really great to provide some employment there. In the people who move our enforcement cameras around New South Wales, the majority of those people are ex-police force members who are living with PTSD, and Police Legacy had a really great training program that they would help those members through, their experiences and what their triggers are. And sorry, I'm not a mental health expert, but it's been so great to have those guys in the team and working there, because it's quite difficult for the ex-police members to actually find good employment and good employers. So those are a couple of the really key partnerships with that sector that we've been going down. So I guess for us, it's if we can find a way to provide employment to that sector, we will.
Yeah, that's really fantastic. And you spoke a lot about, I guess the other side of growth, apart from staff, is about the money side of things. It's so interesting to hear that you guys managed to clock up what you're going to do on a whiteboard in a couple of minutes. Can you talk us through what your capital raising journey has been like? And we'll get to the IPO in a little bit, because that's a whole nother beast. But I guess that initial part, how did you guys agree on the 600,000, and where have you gone from there?
So 600,000 came about because I said to Raven how much money I would need to do basically the first part of the business. He doubled it sensibly, and then said, I'd like to be just over 50%. So there wasn't too much science to it actually, and so we wrote the numbers down. I go, yep, I'm happy with that, and definitely haven't regretted that. I mean, that's had a really great outcome for us, and I hope Raven and Adora are pretty happy with their investment as well. It's gone up a few times since that seed investment. So that was the first bit. Then I missed one capital raise. We sort of had an emergency raise at the end of 2018 where I had to, hold the tin out to my family members and to Adora to chip some more money into the company to keep it afloat, because we almost ran out. And that gave us enough time to get us to the Series A. And I guess we sort of had to delay that until we had enough good news out of New South Wales that, hey, we actually were likely to make something of it, and so that we could sort of attract that $10 million valuation. So it was a 30% dilution, right? Like 3 million raised off 10 million. And the first 1/3 of that came from applying for the, just trying to remember what the grant is called, but it's an early stage innovation company. So if you're an ESIC company, and then there's a guy in Sydney, Matthew Pinter, who ran the sort of ESIC board, and he got onto us, and he was connected to an angel group, or ran an angel group. So he did the first part of the investment, and then we got connected into sort of, I guess you'd most closely call them family offices. So some family offices that then invested the remaining part of the Series A.
Yeah, excellent. And then I guess the IPO process, which is I've been on the on the side of helping with the prospectus for an IPO before, and it just seemed like it was such a grueling process. And you went all the way through nearly to listing. We won't get bogged down in, I guess, all the technicalities, but do you want to give us a summary of what that whole process was like for you?
Yeah, so the IPO process, you have to make that, right? Like that's the whole role. It's make a prospectus, basically. But what's so important about it is that you have to be able to justify every single word in that document. I mean, this document is 150 pages long or so. And every single part of it has to be absolutely factually correct, or else you get sued. And so by the end of the process, it means that your company is squeaky clean. You've gone through a lot of due diligence, very expensive due diligence, and you've gone through all of your contracts. Everybody's been interviewed, and so you end up with a very investable company, essentially. But it is a very long process. It's very distracting to management, and I think we had always thought that we would IPO. We didn't think that we would IPO in. Sorry, my 2- and 5-year-olds might try and bash down the door. But we'd always thought that we would go to an IPO, but not that fast. And the market was hot, and there were a few reasons to give it a crack. But we ended up with the full prospectus, very investable sort of company that then new people coming, like if you stay private, people just go, okay, well, I don't need to do my due diligence because it's all sitting there. You've had a team of people go through it.
So are you glad that you didn't list at the end of the day?
I think it's led to a better outcome, yes, ultimately. It was a bit concerning at the time. You've gone through all this work, and it's a bit of the sunk costs trap. So you've expended all this energy and work, but objectively, when you look at the scenario in front of you, it would have been much better to stay private than to have listed at that point in time. But I suspect we'll go at it again. Not sure when.
Well, at the least, you've got a very flashy prospectus, beautifully printed, something to frame. And you've mentioned you've got kids in the background tonight, and obviously it's really intimidating to jump from, I guess, a standard kind of corporate job into startup land financially, and particularly at the moment, given that the world's kind of on fire. Have you got any advice for any of the founders who are on tonight that have got kids and or have got other financial responsibilities and are kind of weighing up whether or not to throw themselves in?
Oh yeah, that's a tricky area. I think first up, make sure that you have a pretty strong relationship with your partner. If you've got kids, that it'll weather its way through the 3 or 4 years of high intensity and high stress. I think for me, not that I didn't have much of a salary in the first couple of years, but there was the knowledge that the company did have capital, and I knew, like, I'd studied my plan, so I knew I can keep going at this until this date. So I had a clear date that I knew in advance that, we could manage our budget. And that was the point at which, there was a reconsider point. Is it going to work or not going to work? Am I going to get a salary or not? But I didn't have to look at that until then. Whereas that would have really freaked me out if I was thinking about it every month from that point on, and I didn't have a plan, because success comes slowly. It took us quite a long time until we landed that first customer and first revenue, and we're confident something would actually happen. Something good would happen with this company.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess, you spoke a little bit earlier about getting some confidence around you as part of doing the MAP program. What was it that made you decide to apply for MAP?
I had another friend who's also a bit of an entrepreneur, and he knew about the MAP program and sort of made me aware of it. I wasn't able to go to the first briefing, and attend that, and I was up in Sydney. I was meeting with the minister's office actually there, and so my friend went and attended the session for me and filled me in all about it. And I thought, wow, that would be really good. I'm a Melbourne Uni alumni. At that point in time, 20 grand sounded really good, but in retrospect, the 20 grand was totally irrelevant. And the value from MAP is definitely not in the cash.
Yeah, well, we're very glad that you're an alumni, because we can call on you to come and participate in fantastic events like this. Before we open up to questions from everybody who is on the call, and we've definitely had a couple pop through in the chat, where's the company at now? What sort of regions are you in? What's your plan moving forward? What else are you going to tackle outside of phones and seatbelts?
Okay, so regions that we're in, and obviously Australia is our backyard, and it's a very progressive market for road safety. We tend to lead the world on this. So there's many different states are now adopting mobile phone detection camera programs. So that's very pleasing. And I think a few of them are also looking at the seatbelt programs. Internationally, several jurisdictions in Europe, in North America is a particular focus area for us. There's 18,000 potential customers there. It's a bit of a different market, because you go sort of potentially city by city or county by county. We're doing work in India, not very profitable work, but India has the highest number of road fatalities in the world. And there's a lot of problems to solve there. So I'm pretty pleased to be trying to solve some of those challenges as well. On the roadmap, you like to play your cards a little bit close to your chest, but there's one that is probably going to not be of any surprise to people on this call, is that I'm also particularly passionate about impaired driving. So that's the other major source of road trauma that is not being addressed. We have random drug testing, but those tests are extremely expensive. They're very slow to administer. They're never going to replicate random breath testing. And so I think I would like us to try and make a difference against impaired driving as well.
Fantastic. Alrighty. So we do have a few questions that have popped up in the chat. As much as I would love to sit here and ask you question after question, I will be kind to our audience. So what I'm going to do now is also pin into the view my colleague, Abby Middlemiss, who is our events coordinator at MEC. Abby and I are going to tag team and make sure that everyone's questions get answered. So we'll go back up to the top. We had a question from Rebecca Cannon saying, how did you find international sales agents, and what lessons can you share about entering international markets?
So my first step was finding the right person to manage that process. And so that was Sean Miller, who he had a lot of experience in China, which is not a market that we want to go into or ever wanted to go into, but it is relevant experience for sort of looking at various different international markets. And what we've got two different go-to-market strategies depending with what the country is. So in Australia, we go direct, right? So we directly tender, and so we have the relationship with the client. When we look at countries overseas, we don't have those relationships, and this is this public sector. So you need to have a lot of government contacts. There needs to be legislation change in most markets. So you need people who are very sort of well connected and who are able to find the right markets. We've had to find the right people to make changes. We have a bit of a combination. We had a lot of inbound requests because our program was a world first. So we were front page of CNN, we're on the BBC, we were in just so much media globally. And so we had lots of people who contacted us. And so Sean's initial job was, how do I screen these people? And so we developed like a questionnaire to try and get some background information about all these different parties. And the thing with this sort of sector is you have to be hyper conscious of the integrity of the partner you're trying to get on board, that matches your own standards in integrity, particularly if you go to countries that have different corruption perception indexes to our own. We had that. We also had some contacts that I had. I mean, I was a global head of R&D, so I sort of knew various people in different countries as well that I could then pick up the phone and say, hey, who's a good partner? So we had a couple that way as well. So a bit of a mix of different things. No one strategy. Sorry.
Great, thanks, Alex. We've also had, Brad has said, you mentioned that timing was really important, but I'm interested in how much you have to educate people when you are introducing a new innovation approach.
How much you can educate people. Maybe I'm not totally clear on the thrust of the question, to be honest.
Brad, do you want to jump off mute?
I think you're still on mute there, Brad.
Hi, Alexander. It's Brad here. I was really asking about when you've got a new innovative approach, people's understanding of that is generally not as good as what you understand it to be. And how much promotion do you need to do in order to get that message across? Now, I think you partly answered it last time where because of the innovation, a lot of the media outlets picked that up and actually then promoted it. But just getting people to understand what the innovation is and how it actually can solve a problem, I guess, is what I'm interested in.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Thanks for the extra information, the question. So it was a big focus area for us. So employee number 3 was sales, for example. And so in our case, we knew exactly who our customer was, right? So we knew who to approach. And so then it was trying to get meetings with those people and everybody up and down that chain. And so for us, there's a few different key ingredients, and we didn't get that media traction until a year in. And so we had so many different engagement points trying to go, okay, can I meet with the department in this state, that state, that state? Can I meet with the minister? Can I meet with the minister's advisor? Can I meet with an advocacy group that will get me then to the minister? It's like, who can I get to who will then get me to somebody else? And so Sam and I were sort of running around just refining a deck and a pitch and getting that pitch exactly sort of concise and tight and perfect, trying to hook people into the meeting to then carry it forward into getting a meeting and then a subsequent meeting, and just socializing as much as we could with our target audience.
Great, thank you. Adrian has said, you mentioned that you should attain a backer or investor before starting your business. When you started Acusensus, did you have a working prototype of your product, or did you just have a business plan to present to your backer or investor?
Yeah, I had very little, to be honest. I had a story. So I had a story that, was convincing, I guess. It was certainly convincing to one person. I was convincing to a couple of people, that I am this person and I have all this experience, which means that I can succeed at this. And I have this strong motivation to do it. And here's the market, so here's why we can start a business in this and why I'm the guy to do it and why I'm going to see it through, basically. I did have a business plan. It wasn't very good at all. It was lengthy, but it wasn't polished or anything like that. I mean, I'd look back at it now and go, wow, that's embarrassing. But really, this investment was done over coffee, right? So there was no paperwork. I met with him. And also, key here was that the person who introduced me knew and respected me, and Raven knew and respected him. So, you had somebody vouching for me to this person who had worked with me in the target market, and so knew exactly what I was about and what drove me and what I'd achieved at my previous company.
Great. We've got another question from Manish. Actually, two questions. First one, can you zoom in on your journey from an idea to working prototype? Good follow on from the last question, really. Yep,
great follow on. Yeah, so obviously I knew the problem that I wanted to solve. I knew I wanted to solve it with enforcement. I did not actually know that, so there were two key inventions that needed to happen for my problem. One was taking a clear photo through a windshield and developing an artificial intelligence system to detect if people, to screen who was using a phone and who wasn't. I did not know going into it how to solve either of them, to be honest. And I guess I had some confidence that I would get to a solution, but I didn't actually have any proof that I could do it. There's a lot of just very rapid innovation and sort of testing and trying different things, trying to basically do the smallest amount of effort I could to prove something, to rule something in or out and get to the point where by April, I could present a couple of slides to the New South Wales government. So they were doing an RFI, request for information. And I presented to them and said, hey, this is how our AI system works and all that. I had nothing, it didn't work, nothing happened. But I had the first part on the journey, so I knew I could solve it. I was sort of gaining confidence. But it wasn't really until the end of 2018 that we actually had a functioning AI system to develop this stuff. And what we did have was minimum viable product. So the whole way along, so you're always able to constantly release something. So one of those software paradigms that this was applied to hardware and software. So what does the customer actually need to see? They need to see the photographs. So you need to get the photograph right first before you then make the process more streamlined. Not sure if it fully answered the question.
Hopefully Manish will let us know if, if there's more info required. And then the second question. Beautiful, good. The second question in there was also, it will be helpful if you can share some insights on how you transitioned from a 50-50 hiring record to 100 to 0.
Yeah, so 50-50 was when I first became a team leader. And so I had a pretty high attrition rate in my R&D team, to be honest. Like people would sort of work out and they fit or they didn't. Was a little bit ruthless, I guess, as a manager, or I didn't suffer fools gladly, maybe. I started with not much in the company that I was in where they didn't have good processes. So I had to sort of develop it myself on the fly and start improving things, introducing different screening techniques. I guess I'm mostly talking about software engineering. Yeah, getting a better feel for what to ask, how to test. I think what's important is testing people at the actual job that you want them to do. So if it's software engineering, make the person write code and read the code and evaluate the code. And if you need a typist, see if they can type, get them in front of a typewriter. That's probably number one. So I guess I look for two main things when I'm hiring. It's, can they do the job that you need them to do? And can they do it really, really well and lift the bar of your organization? And the other one is, what is the attitude and culture like? Because that has been really rammed home to me from past experiences that, you know, as soon as you have somebody bad in your organization, you know, who's really negative, who has a blame culture, who, you know, does things like that, it is so demoralizing and disruptive that it doesn't matter how good that person is, you can't have them in your organization. Just kills everybody else.
Great, thank you. Raphael has asked, can you tell us about your experience with governments? Do you find some countries more easy to work with than other ones?
Definitely, Australia is awesome. Yeah, there's lots of different varieties of governments. It's a really tough sector. It's really long lead time. There are a lot of relationships that you have to develop. You have to be a very trusted entity. So it's sort of like that old thing of nobody got fired for buying IBM. Yeah, that's pretty important in public sector, where, you know, if you're a public servant, you can't take big risks as a public servant. You know, you'll be pilloried for it. You can't just pick a tiny startup, you know, for something. So yeah, to the point where we were very much considering partnering with much bigger entities and supplying technology to those entities. We're really lucky that that didn't pan out in the New South Wales instance, where we did go it alone. I kind of really regretted that at the time, that we didn't make this partnership with a great government services provider. That all fell through at the last second because we had a big dispute over the contract that they wanted to put in. And they said, you know, if you think, Alex, that you can get a government contract as Acusensus, you know, forget about it. And I said, that's fine, we'll just see about that. And so we tendered and we won it. But yeah, so in terms of other countries, we run through distributors. So people who actually understand those markets and understand the local government there.
Brilliant, thank you. Lachlan has said, could you expand on your comment about equity dilution and getting a smaller piece of a larger pie? Any advice for those that get stuck with an analysis paralysis about dilution? Bit of a tongue twister.
Go with your gut. It's the first one. Maybe don't even analyze it too much. I guess what I mean is that I've run into some people who are really paranoid about control, and, you know, where they don't want to give away anything, and where they want to hold all the equity. They want their valuation to be at $100 million, or else they're not giving away a share. And I guess I'm on the opposite side of that, which is, well, if you're doing a great job and you keep growing a company, your investors are going to be happy with you. So the control issue goes away because, you know, yes, you don't have control in terms of the shareholding, but you have control in terms of the vision and being the founder and, you know, doing such a good job that nobody wants to get rid of you. I figured that, hey, if I'm going to be axed by my board, I probably deserved it. That is somewhat naive because I have heard some horror stories with VCs and private equity and things where they do axe a founder, maybe unfairly, but typically if you're doing a great job, I think you'll continue at it. People want you at the helm.
Great, thank you. We have a question from Paul. Now you are successful, what is the competitive landscape like, e.g. big tech moving into your space?
Haven't seen much with big tech moving in. There are several really large incumbents in this space who I've been consistently surprised by that they're not moving in a lot faster and more aggressively. I guess at the moment, the market is still in the very, very early stages of adoption. You know, we're trying to advocate for change right across the world, but there, you know, the reality is there are only 2 jurisdictions with full live enforcement camera programs in operation. There are some others piloting and trialing, but it's still quite early. So maybe people haven't quite moved into they haven't seen the big revenue opportunity just yet.
Alrighty, does anyone in the audience have any further burning questions that they'd like to ask before we wrap things up for this evening? Colin. Oh, we've got someone else speaking too.
Oh, is that me, Sarah? Can I ask a question?
Yeah, go for it.
Alex, good to see you. I hope you're well. Well, sounds like business at Acusensus is going well. As you know, I've heard the Acusensus story a few times. I know you're very sort of purposeful about the way you've taken Acusensus forward. But are there sometimes when you go to bed at night and just before you put your head on the pillow, you think to yourself, the business I've created saved lives today? I know you're not the sort of person to be smugly self-satisfied, but it must be a wonderful feeling to think you've done something like that. I mean, you know, I've heard the story from the unfortunate death of your friend through the known you through the capital raisings or what have you. But I just think it must give you an enormous sense of self-satisfaction to be doing something that quite deliberately impacts and quite definitely impacts on people's and quite directly impacts on saving people's lives across the world.
Yeah, thanks, Colin, and thanks for your support over the years as well. I think we see it a lot in the hiring. So when people are sort of attracted to our job and our ads, and you know, people often say during the hiring process, like, you know, I really want to work for a company that actually makes a difference, and you know, I really believe in what you're doing. And so that's maybe the biggest reflection point that I have is when you get that mirrored back to you through the hiring process of why people are attracted to try and come and work for your company. And that's, I guess, quite different to maybe some of the other jobs out there. And you know, if you're working in finance or general sales or something like that, it's maybe a little bit harder to find that tangible benefit and an impact on society.
Thank you. And I just have one more question from Lachlan again. He says, what is your barrier to entry by others, particularly with respect to IP? Any patents?
Yeah, we have gone down the patent route. Bit of a mixed bag of results, but I mean, my philosophy here is that you just need to out execute. So like a patent offers you no protection, right? All you can do with a patent is try and sue somebody else who's coming into your market. So you try and prevent them entering your market. I mean, for me, I would much rather just do better than them, you know, than try and sue them. I mean, if they win the business, it's because they're actually better than me. You know, they've got a better product, a better client relationship, you know, better service or things like that. I mean, I want to be the number one on all those metrics personally. So I didn't put my energy into those. Develop a really great product, have really great relations with your client, and serve exactly the problems that they want and that they want solved in the way that, you know, and solve them in the way they want it to be solved.
We've got a question from Leonore, who runs our Tram Air program. Were patents important to your investors?
No.
To the point. Love it. Do we have any other final questions before we wrap things up tonight? Anyone got something they've been holding back?
I'd just like to congratulate Alex for the considerable success he's had and the dedication he's applied to it. I've been with MAP for about 4 or 5 years as a mentor via having a scholarship I used to donate to our MIT software students. And I just think I agree with Alex on the patent proper, just be the best and let them catch up. I think that's always been my philosophy as well. And I know the reason that Alex started the business with his heart on his hand on his heart, I should say. Sorry, Alex. And but seems to have done pretty well everything right for a MAP startup to a successful company, and I have nothing but congratulations for him.
Thanks, Michael. Very nice of you to say.
Wonderful. Well, thanks so much to everybody for all of your input and questions tonight, and a really big thank you to Alex. I have personally loved having you on this call. I'm a bit of a road safety nerd, so this has just been fantastic, and We've got plenty of questions for you at a later date. If people want to get in contact with you, what's the best way to reach you?
Email is good, alex@acusensus.com, and yeah, please feel free to reach out anytime. You know, for all of you on the entrepreneurial journey, I wish you all the greatest success. And yeah, if you have a burning problem or question, please do ask. I guess, yeah, for me, in closing, please drive safe. Don't use your phone, buckle up, don't get caught by one of our cameras.
Wonderful. And for everyone who's on the call, if you're interested in coming to any of our upcoming events, we've got another 2 fireside chats, one at the end of September and another at the end of October. We've got a masterclass on the 8th of September. We've got our open mic pitch night for MAP on Wednesday, the 15th of September. So there's plenty on the go. Make sure you subscribe to the TRAM and MAP newsletters, and we will keep you updated. Thanks again, Alex. Have a good night, everybody. Drive safe.
Thanks, Sarah. See you, everybody.
Everyone.
Thanks, Alex.